Welcome to The Hypnotist, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. Brought to you by the hypnotherapist demanded by celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty, Adam Cox. These recordings took place live from Adam's clinic in London's world-famous Harley Street. This podcast features powerful hypnosis, so do not listen while driving or operating machinery. This recording is not suitable for those with epilepsy or severe mental health issues. So, get yourself comfortable and enjoy today's episode of The Hypnotist.
Hello, it's Adam here, and in this episode of The Hypnotist, I'm going to be looking at a very specific emotion, and the reason for the topic this particular live session, it's broadcasting live on YouTube and recorded for the podcast, is on disappointment, is because a recent event kind of happened to me which left me with a feeling I haven't really had at this level of intensity for a while, which was disappointment. And for me, I'm a big fan of self-reflection, and I kind of thought, well, every emotion has a useful context. It has a benefit if it's used or harnessed in the right way. So I thought, given that this topic of disappointment has been on my mind, why not create a hypnosis session to take some of the insights and self-reflection that I've been doing on disappointment and apply it to a hypnosis session so that not just you listening right now, but anyone, including myself, could listen to this in the future if they're in the state of disappointment and they want to kind of find the silver lining in that cloud. This hypnosis session could be the catalyst for that to take place. I'm also going to use one of the Mike Mandel hypnotic language cards, and this one is the Ten of Hearts, Perhaps. So I'm going to read out the card. It says here, or perhaps you won't. Perhaps is another word that's hard to resist. It makes no demands on anyone. Perhaps makes it easier to consider options, and that's what makes it so effective. And the example is, perhaps you'll find ways to use this powerful word, and perhaps it will make positive changes in all your hypnosis work. And normally I shuffle the cards and just randomly take a card. I chose perhaps because perhaps is dealing with the possibility of an outcome. And in many ways, that's what disappointment is. One of the definitions of disappointment is when reality fails to live up to an expectation. And sometimes, even with the very best of intentions not to have an expectation, expectations or the cousin of expectations, hopes, can still arrive. And if at some level you are expecting something or hoping for something to happen, and then the reality doesn't quite live up to that particular point, what you can be left with is this feeling of either the grief that comes from a loss of a possibility. Now, in actuality, you haven't really lost anything because you never had it to begin with. But those people that think very clearly about the future, that are very good at setting goals and believe in this idea of manifesting future outcomes, can compellingly believe at some level of the likelihood of a future event happening in such real terms that when it doesn't happen and when it can't happen, then the feeling of loss, not of reality, but of the possibility that what could have happened didn't happen, what you're left with is a sense of disappointment. So this hypnosis session is going to be looking at addressing and accepting a feeling of disappointment and then moving it on to the value that lies in that particular emotion. And it's worth you knowing that even the most painful of emotions, and I wouldn't say that disappointment is by any stretch of the imagination the most painful of all the emotions. I would say bereavement and grief is probably much more intense than disappointment. But it does follow a similar path in the sense that if you can extract value from a perceived negative emotion, then imagine what you can do with constructive or resourceful or positive emotions. And that's really the last thought I will leave you with before we start the hypnosis session. So find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed, relax, and enjoy the session. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe in, imagine breathing in a feeling of calm and relaxation. On the outward breath, if it's safe to do so, allow your eyelids to close, and in doing so, find yourself going deeper and deeper, relaxed. That's right. Deeper and deeper, relaxed. And perhaps you listen to the sound of my voice and the words itself enable you to direct your attention to my words, which then calms your inner dialogue, enabling you to breathe deeper. And by breathing deeper, imagine that perhaps with each and every breath, you're able to go deeper and deeper, relaxed. That's right. Continue to breathe in and breathe out, and notice that the muscles in your neck and your shoulders are loosening. Perhaps you can notice tension in your forehead or your cheeks. And on that outward breath, allow those muscles to just let go. And in doing so, as they let go, the relaxation enables you to breathe even deeper. And by breathing even deeper, you can then release more of that tension in your outward breath, enabling you to go deeper and deeper into that pleasurable state of resourceful relaxation. And I want you to create something in your mind, perhaps a scenic place, maybe a forest or a meadow, maybe a place that you've been to outdoors recently that you felt completely relaxed. Maybe you could see the ocean or a lake or a stream. It doesn't matter what, but just imagine that you're there in that place, outside. Maybe you can feel the sun on your skin. Perhaps you can get a sense of what the breeze would be like. Perhaps you can imagine all the sounds that you heard back then. Maybe the sounds of birds, the wind in trees. Perhaps something else. And I wonder, when you're in that place, isn't it interesting that you feel different? Like you've escaped, temporarily, from whatever reality means to you. And I want you to imagine in this place that a particular moment comes to mind. A moment of intense disappointment. And I want you to imagine, rather than feeling that disappointment, that you can see yourself almost on a giant screen in front of you. See that version of you with that disappointment. See yourself like you're someone else. And I want you to see the facial expression that you have with that disappointment. Perhaps you can imagine what your inner dialogue is like with that disappointment. Maybe there's a voice inside your head. Maybe there's a particular facial expression. Maybe you're breathing in a particular way, but see yourself on that giant screen just in your imagination. Even if you're out in nature, you can imagine what it would be like, perhaps to see a giant screen with you on that screen, in the state of intense disappointment. And you may remember what it was that caused that intense disappointment. Maybe it's recent. Maybe it's so recent that it even feels current. And yet you can see yourself, even if it was from half an hour, a day, a week, a month ago, see yourself on screen like you're someone else. And it's that version of you that is experiencing the disappointment, not the you in the physical body that you feel like you're in right now. And then I want you to imagine seeing that version of you, and then just decide, intend, that version of you fully accepts and feels that disappointment. One of the things that can happen when people feel disappointment is they can bury it, bottle it up. They can pretend that they're not bothered by that emotion, but this version of you that you're seeing on that giant screen in front of you accepts it, acknowledges it, appreciates that yes, they do feel that disappointment. They say that disappointment is when expectation fails to live up, or that reality fails to live up to the expectation that you have in your mind. That the deficit between what actually happens and what you hoped would happen is the level of disappointment that you can feel. And that version of you that you can see on that giant screen right now accepts at some level that the reality failed to live up to a hope, an intention, an expectation, or just a desire. Something you wanted to happen, and yet it didn't. And that version of you fully accepts that. And there are two lessons that could be learned from this experience. One is in the past, and one is in the future. And first of all, let's visit the past. I want you to climb into that version of you on that giant screen in front of you, fully acknowledging and accepting this feeling of disappointment that you have. Notice where in your body you feel it. Maybe it's in your gut, your chest, your head, or maybe somewhere else, but acknowledge it, feel it. Get a sense of where it is, how intense it is. Perhaps give it a number from 1 to 10. By acknowledging the disappointment, you're then able to shift it, to extract the value from it. And then imagine taking that feeling and going back in time to the point of inception. Accept the idea that perhaps in order to feel this way, there was an expectation, a hope, a desire, something you wanted to happen in the future that hadn't happened yet. And I want you to go back to the very point where that desire, that want, that expectation, that intention was created. Go back in time to the very point where you thought about the future in a way that you wanted something desirable to happen. And maybe you made a picture in your mind. Maybe you said something to yourself. That's going to happen. I want that. I'm looking forward to that. Or maybe it was just the quiet knowledge of something that you really hoped would happen. And I wonder, going back in time, knowing what you now know, knowing that you now know that it didn't happen, what would it be like at the very point where you were setting that intention, having that hope, having that intention, what if you lowered that expectation? What if you decided in advance that you would be happy if perhaps something very small happened? Decide in advance that at the point where you are making that bigger hope, that bigger desire, that bigger intention, to set it much, much lower. Something as simple as perhaps just that the process happens, just that you get through it with your health still intact. There is a saying that when you trade your expectations for appreciations, your life becomes a happier place. And back in time, at the very point where you had that hope, that desire, that wish, that expectation, imagine lowering the expectations so much that you're not expecting anything. You're happy to enjoy the process. You have this mentality of whatever happens, happens. And you can appreciate the good things that happen without expecting anything. And in doing so, what it means is that with such low expectations or hopes, anything that positively happens, you can appreciate and enjoy all the more, knowing that it now exceeds your expectations. You don't hope for anything, but you can appreciate when good things happen. And then imagine with those lower expectations, lower hopes, but with an optimistic attitude that good things could happen. Perhaps good things will happen. And then imagine going forwards in time and then reliving what happened, but with these lowered expectations, lowered intentions. Notice now that when the same thing happens, isn't it strange that perhaps there's an absence of that feeling of disappointment, because you can now appreciate all those good things that genuinely did happen over that time period. Perhaps a seed is being sown in your subconscious mind that although it's good to have an idea of what you want to happen, maybe consider these possibilities rather than expectations or hopes. And you can tell the difference, because if you can say to yourself that if this doesn't happen you would be disappointed, then it means at some level there is an expectation or a cousin of expectation in place. Whereas if you can say, even if none of these things happened, I would be more than content, then effectively you are managing your own expectations to give you the ability to enjoy more of what is good. Imagine going back into the present now, back to that feeling of when that disappointment was there, and notice that perhaps that wherever it was on that scale of 1 to 10, maybe it's already lower. Because by going back in time and imagining what it would be like to lower the expectations or hopes of what may happen, already that feeling of disappointment is starting to reduce. And then what would it be like for you to say, knowing what I now know, how would I change how I think about things in the future? The truth is that disappointment can be a boot camp for resilience. You can become stronger, more powerful, wiser in the future. By experiencing disappointment, sometimes even bitter disappointments, you are now equipped to deal with future similar circumstances in a very different way. You have the ability to become wiser at managing your own expectations, but also deciding what you're going to give your time, attention, or money to, so that you reduce the probability of disappointments happening in the future. Imagine that greater mental fortitude, an increasing level of emotional intelligence that comes from that disappointment. That rather than disappointment being a bad thing, what if it is this boot camp to make your mind stronger than ever before? Imagine that you've got the ability to make better choices, better decisions, having clearer thinking. What if disappointment and what you learn from disappointment almost is an immunization against similar disappointment in the future? That by having a little dose of disappointment, it prevents larger disappointments in the future. And then, interestingly, when you've truly experienced disappointment and you've learned the lesson from it, then it's okay to let it go. Continue to breathe in this resourceful feeling of relaxation and then allow in your outward breath you to continue to allow that disappointment to leave your body. It's no longer necessary. It served its purpose. It's given you a feedback loop to reflect on setting expectations in the future, made you wiser, more resilient. It enabled you to make better choices, better decisions. You are now wiser as a result of your disappointment. And then also realize that in the big scheme of things, this is actually something very small. That in the future, there will be big changes in your life. There will be things that happen that you have no control over. And that comparing this disappointment to the future big events of your life is all relatively small. You know that your self-worth hasn't changed. You are the same person you were before and after this disappointment. You have value. You have the ability to have just as much impact in the world as you had before. You've accepted this self-disappointment. You've accepted that you have the ability to manage your own expectations going forward. And you've also accepted that this has given you something valuable that will enable you to be better, stronger, more positive in the future. And just accept that the worst thing you can do with disappointment is allow it to make you jaded, to make you a lesser person than you are, to make you pessimistic, to make you apathetic. You haven't let it fester. You've acknowledged it, owned it, learned from it, and now you've let it go. And in doing so, you are now wiser than you were before this disappointment. And then imagine leaving that big screen and finding yourself back out there in that relaxing place in nature, knowing that you are wiser for the experience, and then realize that all of this, nature, the big screen, the memory, is all just thoughts within thoughts, ideas within ideas, dreams within dreams. And actually, you're listening to my voice right now, firmly in the present, and perhaps with a greater insight now than you've ever had before, enabling a future of more positive possibilities, because you are stronger than you were before. Take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your nose. Wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, get a sense that you're in your own physical body, listening to my voice right now, as very soon I will count from 1 to 10 to awaken you. You will awaken feeling positive, optimistic, wiser, more resilient, and feeling that you've extracted the value from that disappointment and now allowed yourself to let go of that disappointment. starting to count to awaken you. 1, 2, 3, waking up. 4, 5, 6, more alert. 7, 8, open your eyes, open your eyes. 9, 10, wide awake, wide awake, wide awake.
Thank you for listening to The Hypnotist with Adam Cox, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. To automatically receive the latest episodes, please subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, please share this episode with just one friend you think it could help. And if this episode helped you, please leave us a 5-star review.
Thank you for watching that. My screen in front of me actually turned itself off while I was recording that, so that's why I had to jump up and switch the screen back on. I hope you found that useful. If there was a specific memory of disappointment or perhaps a recent case of disappointment, let me know in the comments if you actually found that useful in any way. I hope it did. Like I say, I recorded this episode because there was a specific event that took place that made me feel disappointed, and actually just going through this process certainly gave me a different perspective. I certainly felt like I extracted the value from that experience. I feel like I'm wiser and more resilient going forward. So it was useful for me. So even if you didn't get any use from it, I certainly did for myself. Hopefully you did. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, click the bell button so you get notifications of these kind of hypnosis sessions in the future. But also, if you have got any comments, any feedback, any realizations, any insights from this hypnosis session, please put them in the comments, because that always helps to kind of grow the audience and really works with the YouTube algorithms to find new audiences for the show. So thank you again for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Take care.